Welcome to another episode of the Military Transition Academy podcast. Today, we're honored to have retired Chief Master Sergeant Dave Cheney with us, a distinguished leader with 27 years of service in the United States Air Force. Most recently, Dave served as Chief of Operations for A4 at 2nd Air Force, managing logistics, engineering, and supporting operations for a vast training mission spanning 74 locations worldwide. In this episode, Dave dives into the wins and the lessons from his military transition and shares what he calls his Chicken Express moment. Tune in to find out what that is all about. Welcome, Dave, to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, so I'm Dave Cheney, 27 years and a couple of months in the Air Force as a civil engineer, carpenter, welder, sheet metal mason, locksmith. If I can't build it, you don't need a vertical engineer.
Exactly.
Retired as Chief Master Sergeant, E9, Command Sergeant Major equivalent to some of the other services, or Master Chief of the Navy. And retired back in April of 2021. And so we're getting close to the 3.5-year mark, I guess, and still struggling with finding that new career that's a good fit for me and my work life. I don't have the good word for it. I don't like balance. I look at it as a ratio, but trying to find out what that ratio looks like. And there's got to be a better word to use that's a little more better for marketing, kind of thing. But
I agree.
I'm hoping today I can share some of my wins and maybe a couple of my learning moments, and hopefully the intent from my perspective is to pass on some things that might help another struggling veteran out there that's trying to transition, whether they're in or they're going through the transition or post-transition.
Yeah, and although you and I, we retired, and so there is some sort of safety net when you retire from the military, I do believe that what we're going to talk about today, there are some foundational principles that anybody, regardless if you're separating, retiring, or being discharged from the military, can utilize in order to navigate the military transition. And so one thing I really liked what you said, some of my wins and some of my lessons learned. So let's go ahead and kick the podcast off with, 3 years later, what are some of your wins?
Some of my wins, I've had some good opportunities. I've got to, I say a win is sometimes struggling. Sometimes you got to struggle to appreciate it. And it's interesting. My son, he's 25 now, and he's got a great job right now, but before he started college, he worked at a place called Chicken Express, which is a big Texas fried chicken restaurant. And one day he looked at me and, he talks about his success now, but because of working at Chicken Express or McDonald's or whatever that is for you, he said, I appreciate the jobs I have now. And he said, Dad, this is your Chicken Express moment. And, so as a prideful, hardworking, I think successful in the military, I kind of needed to hear that. And so I think the funny thing is some of my wins are actually could be looked at as losses for some other people, just to appreciate some of the things. And so some of the wins, right? I'll talk about my current job. My current job, the big win is I finally found that amazing culture and climate where my boss is hardworking, dedicated, tries hard. She's only been a supervisor for 3 years, but I'll say she's probably in my top 3 or 4 of supervisors over my 27-year.
Wow, that's awesome.
Career. And it's not because she's an expert at being a supervisor. It's just because you can see the passion and her hard work, her work ethic. She's not do as I say, do as I say kind of person. She's leads by example and through action. And so that part's great. My coworkers are great. Another win, and there's another side of that story too, which we'll get into later, I guess. But another win is while I haven't found the perfect job, I've had 2 or 3 opportunities. I'm on my second civil service job. I did some independent contract work. So I've got to close out a few of those check boxes that I thought I was interested in. I'm still not sure, so I have some of those experience to help me figure out what this next chapter looks like, what the next season looks like. I
Yeah, and that's
classified that as a win.
absolutely, that's what it's all about. It's sort of, let's go back to that Chicken Express moment where you're able to, appreciate what it is that you have now, maybe based on your past experiences. And also, it's all about the compound effect. Like what you did in the military, is helping you with what you're doing now. And regardless of where you think you're currently at, I know it's probably a little bit tougher as a chief where maybe your identity was kind of wrapped up in that rank and that position, and also the opportunities that you had in order to lead and develop people. But every organization that we now enter and we work in is really an opportunity for us to discover what it is that we actually want. And so one question that I like to ask people is, you're about 3 years out now, and I'm 4 years out. And what I thought I wanted 4 years ago, it's absolutely not what I want now. So take us through when you retired and now.
Mm,
What are some things that have changed mentally for you? Because I do
mm,
think it's important for us to, identify that there's two parts of the military transition, right? We have the logistics, that's the, resume, that's the interview, that's the VA, that's moving and finding the job. But then we also have this mental transformation that a lot of us have to navigate in order to discover who we are outside of uniform. So why don't you take us through that a little bit?
um, so I think kind of what I want now is still what I wanted then. Um, it's difficult. I'm not willing to move anymore. I'm tired of moving. My family's tired. I mean, we're empty nesters now, but my wife doesn't want to move. We're where we want, where we landed. We're happy where we're at. Um, I think the tough thing for me is because of my rank, my position. I worked for a 2-star. We were at a NAF, so I'm advising 5, 6 wing commanders or
Oh
deputies,
yeah.
all the groups that fall under them, working directly. I think you're a personnelist, if I
Yep.
did my homework right. Working with the Air Force Personnel Center and all those kind of things, where I'm making phone calls on behalf of the 2-star. I'm engaged. I was rocking and rolling,
Yeah.
executing the mission. I was the person that the general would call in when they couldn't figure something out. And so I love that part of my job. I like being in the middle of stuff. I like being a problem solver. Um, but I was not ready. I've been preparing for retirement for my whole career. I wrote my first resume when I was, 7 years in as a staff sergeant. And I updated it over the years to kind of articulate what I do in the military. And everything I did was strategic. The classes I took, my first master's degree in strategic leadership, because I knew it would help me make chief, because it correlated with that, but I also knew it'd be something that helped me in the civilian sector later on. So it was a twofer.
Yeah.
Um, what I wasn't ready for is when all of the phone calls stopped.
Hmm.
I mean, we're talking going from 20-ish plus phone calls, 60 to 80 emails a day, which obviously we can't answer all of those, but um, to being in the mix of things to silence. And
Yeah.
a lot of people's like, oh, that's great. I can spend time with family and all this. Well, at my age, my second kid was in high school. My other kid was in San Angelo, Texas, finishing college and that kind of thing. So, regretfully, I spent so much time being ambitious through my career. I kind of neglected them. And luckily, I was able to save it. But by the time I retired, I also missed another window. Okay, so there's the first part of that. What I wanted to be a dean at a vocational school.
Hmm.
And I don't want to go too long on this, but I also want to tell this because this is part of my
Yeah.
story, right? My narrative. My high school GPA was 1.2. I went to Tulsa Votech, which I wasn't supposed to, because Tulsa Vocational School, to be an auto mechanic, you had to have I think a B average, and I had a C or D average at the time.
Wow.
But my principal, my dad was a janitor. He was a prior Marine and Army. He walked into his office and asked for a favor, and I got one of those favors. And that Tulsa Votech was the best thing ever happened to me.
Wow.
And so fast forward, because of the skills I learned when I took the ASVAB, I smoked the mechanical side of it because I understood Ohm's law and all these things that are
Yeah.
important in any mechanical job. And so gratefully, Community College of the Air Force, I call it the gateway into higher education.
Absolutely.
I was in Japan, took Japanese language. I took classes, got my first community college associate degree. We call it, us Air Force folks call it a CCAF, but really it's an
Yep.
associate's degree. Um, and then, I came here near Keesler at the CB base down the road here, and I got my bachelor's and then later my master's, while I also got developed through my career leadership experience, thriving and failing as a supervisor and all of those things. And so what I wanted to do, and I was working on a PhD when I was retiring for human capital development, which falls into that HR
Yep.
kind of community training and development as well. And I was doing that because I wanted to be a dean of vocational school because I wanted to help people like me that didn't think they were good enough. And I think
Yeah.
I saw that podcast with Adam Peters, and you guys were talking
Yep.
about trades and learning a trade if you don't and have that skill set and that kind of thing because we need it. We've spent so much time looking at degree plans and education as
Yeah.
a nation that now our trades are falling short. That's why the prices are going up and the ability to help our infrastructure is in the
Absolutely.
wrong direction. Um, but I was quickly humbled because I couldn't break in. Even as a former instructor for Community College of the Air Force, we have all the same requirements,
Yep.
all the SACS requirements, because this is a true associate degree, conferred degree. Even my bachelor's degree, being in vocational education, I couldn't break in. And it was
Hmm.
very humbling and frustrating. And I kind of gave up and I got to a bad part of my time where I was like, oh, this isn't working. I got to pivot a little bit. So that was the first thing I wanted to do. The second thing I wanted to do, I have a unique background of experience in the CE community because I did a lot of jobs that normally officers would do.
Hmm.
So I have that kind of purple collar background, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do, and I have a lot of training and education time. So I really wanted to do something in AETC, Air Education and Training Center. That's the Air Force's training major command for enlisted training and officer training. I wanted to combine that in my engineer training to work civil service or something like that. And I did that for a little bit. The problem is the job isn't there because I'm unique and the job I'm looking for is so unique, it's not out there
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think my mindset has changed to I've kind of had to settle a couple of times. And I've had to settle, but settle for the job, but not settle for the end state because I'm still hungry. I'm
Yeah.
still hungry for a next career. And the frustrating part about the mindset for me is when you talk about development in the civilian sector, you continue to grow, right? We're talking salary,
Yep.
position, all those things. And so you continue to grow. And a lot of the organizations out there that focus on military. Yeah, we want to hire military. We want to hire military. Most of those jobs are those mid-tier jobs. It's not always the executive level jobs, the things that are kind
Yeah.
of equivalent. And so for a lot of us, especially in that E8, E9, 05, 06 realm,
Yep.
we have to quickly realize that not only are we going, sometimes we have to go back one or two steps to get back up to where we were and get her back on our guide slope for growth.
Yep.
Like right now, I'm 4 or 5 steps behind where I was. And so I think my mindset has changed on that perspective. Maybe I was too arrogant, I like to
Hmm.
say, on my expectations and expectation management. And then I think the final thing I'll say, and I'll shut up and see what other questions you have, is in the military, we don't do interviews.
Yeah.
I took a class for interviewing and for my undergrad degree back in 2004, and I did fantastic. I was younger. My mind was more effective back then. Um, and I was arrogant thinking because I can speak in front of large crowds and because I'm used to leading large number of people in various directly or indirectly in various roles, I thought I would nail it. And I was humbled real quick. I did horrible my first few interviews. So, um, and I know I'm kind of all over the place, but kind of
No.
to roll that back to, my mindset now is I'm not going to settle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to continue to grow where I am, whether I'm in the right position or not. Kind of like the stuff you hear in the military as a chief, that's something I always would encourage.
Bloom where you're planted, right?
Yes, bloom where you're planted through
Yeah.
action. Action knows no discrimination.
Exactly. Yeah,
And
so thinking of that, what you said, one thing that I relate to a lot, it's like the phone calls stopped, and I think that quickly translates to you stopped being needed so much.
Mhm.
And especially in the Air Force, in the senior NCO tier, that is what we're there for. We're there to be needed. We're there to mentor and we're there to coach. We're there to guide, up the chain, but we're also there to, assist down the chain as well. And then all of a sudden, that's not a part of our duties anymore because there's very few, in my experience, civilian jobs that really allows us to do that, right? Where we coach and mentor up and we coach and mentor down. So knowing what you know now, when you said that the phone call stopped, and I could see it when you talk about it, that obviously, I mean, it is 3 years. It's only been 3 years. And so one thing I offer to you is some grace, right? Because we've spent our adult lives in the Air Force. So it's going to take a little time to adjust to the outside. But, what would you say to those senior NCOs, the E7s and above, or the field grade
Mhm.
officers? What would you say to them? And as far as how to prepare maybe for that mental transformation that we all have to eventually go through.
Yeah, so there's something I used to say to young officers, right? As a chief or a senior NCO, especially in the Air Force, part of our charge is to develop young officers.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I had to explain to a lieutenant one time who was trying to, O1 telling a 20-year E7 how to how to dig a hole.
Yeah.
And I had to pull him aside. I was like, Lieutenant, that's not how this works. I said, you're asking the SME, like the SME,
Yeah.
right? How to do this. Actually, you're telling them how to do it. Okay, you're an engineer. Um, Here's my recommendation: humble approach, confident execution.
Mm.
And I have to tell myself that sometimes. I've said it to others quite a bit, and I forget about it sometimes. And so that's one nugget that I would pass on.
I love it.
And
Let's say it again. Humble approach,
humble
confident
approach,
execution.
confident execution,
Yeah. And
meaning,
I will say when I was in the civilian sector for 4 years, like true civilian sector, one thing I realized quickly was those young people right out of college, they had more technical ability than I had because when I was growing up in the Air Force, I had people that did spreadsheets in Excel. And I didn't necessarily have to do all that. Or we got it from, Air Force Personnel Center and I could work a formula or two and, navigate the Excel document a little bit. But I was humbled quickly, in my own regard that people that were coming out of college had more technical ability than I did. A lot of good like critical thinking and problem solving as well. I think the generations nowadays maybe get a bad reputation, but it's cool to hear, how they come up with, decisions and stuff like that. And so I love that what you said, a humble approach, confident execution.
and it ties to something I said earlier about let your actions speak for yourself.
Yeah.
And to tie that to another example, I had a tech sergeant working with me one time. Um, and I don't like to talk about demographics too much, but it does kind of key to this one
Mm-hmm.
because I like to focus on the task and measure people against the task. But you do have this scenario of a female African American, tech sergeant, and she has some challenges.
Absolutely.
Um, and I'll say that some of the command team, I'm not very happy with how they approached it. And so indirectly, she was assigned to me to work on some things. And I used that approach with her. And I said, listen, you feel like you're being discriminated against. I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know. I'm not in those rooms when they're talking, right? But what I do know is that you can fight that through your actions.
Yeah.
And so I would give her a vector. At first, she would come to me asking questions how to do everything. I said, stop, I'm not telling you how to do it. From now on, you tell me how you're going to do it, and I'll re-vector you if I need to, but I expect you to do it and let your actions speak. And I'm grateful that she took that advice, because my section was doing great because of her hard work. But now that individual's made master sergeant E7 first time, and now she's the captain.
Woo!
You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so that's just kind of one of those things that I just kind of would like to drive home for some of those folks is we get in this dynamic talking about stuff, but let your actions speak. And so think about that in all of these things when you're talking about translation, whether it's verbal in interviews, whether it's written in your resume, or the mental thing, just let those actions speak. Another thing that I would pass on to those folks is this is where my cockiness got me in trouble. I mean, I did some amazing things in my career. I'm very proud of them. Deployed in Afghanistan, doing a lot of multi-million-dollar projects while under fire out in the combat zone.
Yeah.
So I feel like I can do a lot. You talk about Excel. I took Excel classes back in 2000. I've been pretty good at Excel through my career, right?
Maybe it was just my part of the Air Force, because everyone I talked to says, "Oh yeah, I did Excel." I was like, "Well, apparently not my
Well,
part of the Air Force." But go
I'm
ahead.
an engineer guy. I mean, it kind of goes with it.
Yeah.
Well, luckily, I had a good supervisor that signed me up for some FSS classes that they were offering for
There you
Word,
go. There's that
back in
plus.
2000 when those was coming out. But what I would say is, where was I going with that? So where my cockiness came in, as I'm writing my resume, I'm like, wow, this is good stuff. Like, there's no way they're not going to hire me. And to me, a lot of those things I think are assumed. It's like, I've got a bunch of degrees. I not only do I have experience, I have the education, right, degree wise, but where I failed, I didn't get the credentials.
Mm.
And while in my mind, I'm like, you don't run 109 projects and multi-million or $109 million, 23 projects, whatever that number is, without not knowing Excel or PowerPoint. That's part of
Yeah.
the job. But the executives that are hiring might know that. But the process of getting, first off, we're writing resumes to be AI versus people now. And then we get to the people, and by the time they read it, it doesn't make any sense anymore. But those credentials really stand out to get through those HR folks, because there's various levels of those HR folks that are filtering these packages. And so that's the thing that I didn't understand. So I would say one of the things I would really like to pass on, and because of that, I came up with this thing a while back, and because I did training for the civil engineers, I was the training pipeline manager for all the civil engineers in the Air Force, is think about a triangle. And in that triangle, you have what I think experience should be on top, because nothing matters if you haven't experienced it, especially when you're looking for mid and senior tier jobs. But then the other two corners are your education and your credentialing. And I call it the marketability strategy. And so I wish I would have told myself that earlier. You're not going to have time to do it in your last year. You're not going to have time to, if you decide I'm going to retire next year, you might get a credential or two. Like I was working on my SCP, which is the HR certificate.
Yep.
I got my PMP last year. The thing about it, the PMP, because of my job, it wasn't hard for me. But I don't have experience in earned value management because what I did wasn't for profit, right? So it wasn't as important. I'm working on Excel certification now. I can't do the expert one because I have to do the novice ones first. I forgot the labels for them. So I'm doing that now so that I can get that on my resume to help communicate that. So I think
I love that. Let's talk about that triangle, because, in the PMP world, we call it the talent triangle, right? Your ways of working, your power skills, and your business acumen. And you could really take that triangle based on what you were saying as far as experience, education, and credentials. Also, in the project management world, we talk about the difference between tacit and explicit knowledge. So explicit knowledge are those degrees, those certifications, but then, tacit knowledge is the hands-on and the experience. And so going back to what you said, as far as, your humble approach and confident execution, one thing that I'll never forget, Senior Master Sergeant Gary Duvall, when he was retiring, and I was a staff sergeant at the time, he told me, when you leave the military, you have to remember that you're not starting at the beginning, right? You're not starting at the very beginning, but you do need to remember that when you join the military, you have this, progressive sort of career where you went from this rank and then you did this skill level training and then got this promotion, blah, blah, blah. And he said that's going to be the same in the civilian sector too. So you thinking that you can walk out of the military as a director of HR or an HR manager, that may not be possible. There's always exceptions to the rule. And so when I was, planning my retirement, I said, okay, I'm going to go for, generalist or mid-level positions. I want to learn human resources out in the civilian sector, and I'm going to show them what I have, and then I will progress appropriately. And that's really what I did. It also gave me a lot more competence, which increased my confidence. And then I was able to get those positions that a lot of people thought that maybe I should have applied for, at first. So I love that you said that, because when we walk out of the military, regardless if you're separating, if you're retiring, or if you're being discharged, you are walking out of the military with some sort of transferable skill set. But that's not enough, right? That's that experience, but that's not enough in the civilian sector. You need that education and you need the credentials, whether it's an HR credential, a PMP, Excel, Sec Plus, management, whatever it may be. So I love that you identify that, and I love that triangle. So experience, education, and credentials. So, okay, so knowing what you know now, humble approach, confident execution. Anything else that you would share with, especially that tier, the senior NCOs and the officers? Knowing, 3 years now, and I can tell, just by listening to what you're saying, that, the mental transformation is tough. I always say, what did you expect? Like, you serve for 20 years, just like civilians, when they leave a career field for 20 years, it's tough for them too. So another piece of advice for that, that demographic of people?
Well, so there's some other things. There's some misnomers out there that make it harder too. So, and we can talk about a couple different things. So first, I'll focus on walking into that civil service job. And so, so depending on what experience, so here's a big problem with the civil service community, period. A lot of people haven't read the OPM guidance. A lot of hiring authorities and people, and there's a culture out there. And this culture
the OPM guidance, for people that might not know, share what the OPM guidance is.
The Office of Personnel Management.
Basically, it's the human resources way of executing those positions.
It provides the requirements for every single government job, whether it's DHA, whether it's DOD. There's other little rules you need to know about the 180 days, but for non-DODs, that rule doesn't apply, and all these things. But you got to do your homework. So that's one of the nuggets, is do your own homework. Go to the OPM guidance, because we got to break this culture. And here's what the culture is. There's a lot of people that don't understand the equivalency rule. They think that, oh, you're a chief, so that's an GS-11 equivalent. No. What is my experience, my responsibilities? That's what the equivalency rule is for hiring.
Yeah.
Because of my position, I was equivalent to a GS-13, not because of my rank. There's another rule out there for privileges, like a chief, or E9 and 06 and a GS-15, right? Parking privileges, lodging, all those kind of things. There's privileges that are associated with some of those ranks. And when you look at the privileges, a GS-11 is like a lieutenant or a major and that kind of thing. But when it comes to hiring, it's all about your experience levels and how that competes to the GS equivalent. So that's one thing. But you got to do your homework to know that and how to articulate some of those things. Not saying, hey, you guys are broken, but saying, hey, here's how I'm equivalent to this, or find a way to throw that in there. Because that hiring culture, me and two other people that worked the same job as me, when we were transitioning, people were telling us we need to be a GS11. And I'm like, I'm not above being a GS11, but I don't think in some jobs, maybe that's right. But
Yeah.
when the GS13 sitting next to me has all the same responsibility levels as me, but they're going home. And now I'm also, by the way, dual hatted because I'm a group equivalent senior enlisted leader. And I'm looking at every single enlisted EPR or annual evaluation before it goes to the command chief to make sure it's ready for that level of scrutiny. And I'm doing that in my spare time because those hardworking enlisted folks deserve it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to school at night and I'm doing, these other things. And so, how do we, when you talk about translating to the civilian community, how do we
Yeah.
translate some of that? And sometimes the civilian community is not just industry, but those civilian employees too, especially the people that haven't done their time as a senior NCO or an officer and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So, I think the nugget from that is if you're thinking civil service, look at the OPM guidance. And you can Google OPM guidance, and there's a lot
Yep.
of information.
You can just go on the
Under,
website. It's out there. Yeah.
understand the series.
Yeah.
I'm an enlisted engineer. I at a GS13 level, a lot of the things you're doing is not actually engineering, but you have to have the degree to qualify for those jobs. So people like me, I have to look for the 301 series or 343 series or
Yep.
training anything in the 1700 series, and knowing what those series are. So that would be one nugget. Um, when you think about the triangle, plan as early as you can to start fulfilling that for the job you think you want to do. And then, what was my comment? Oh, when you think about the industry and you're trying to transfer over, and I think we have a couple of notes from our previous things. We were talking about three categories: verbal, written, and mental translation. How do we translate what I just said about my previous job, when I was in uniform? How do you translate all that in a 20-minute interview? And by the
Yeah.
way, not everybody's the same at interviews. I went to an interview at the community college and they said, you only have 20 minutes. And then they had 20 questions. Well, I have to give you an answer and I have to translate. I have to explain what that means. I have to
Yeah.
translate an acronym and how does my time as an instructor for the Air Force for carpenters, how does that translate to the community college? Because I have to add the piece that we're SACS accredited. We still have to meet all those requirements that you have to meet to train, curriculum development,
Absolutely.
all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and really what you're discussing, and this is very aligned with what I discuss and what Vets to PM stresses is let's focus on what we can control, right?
yes,
So we can't control recruiters or hiring managers or civilian hiring, authorities. We can't control people not knowing OPM and not executing the right rules and whatever it may be. We can't control the ghosting. We can't control the job market, but we can control what we do. And I really love your triangle. So first, let's identify that transferable skill set. And so I'll give you an idea of how we do it, and then maybe you can, give some tips and tools. But when you want to articulate your experience, the best thing to do before you start is to really visit those job postings, those civilian job postings, and start highlighting similarities, things that you've done before, things that sound familiar, and things that make you, because when you read job postings, like when I was reading human resource, generalist or business partner job postings, I was like, yep, I've done that. Yep, I've done that. Yep, I've done that. Maybe it's a little easier to translate, but HR in the military is not HR in the civilian sector. So look at your job postings of those, positions that sort of tickle your fancy a bit and start highlighting, what sounds familiar, what you've done, what you maybe have experience in. And then you can also start highlighting those basic and those preferred requirements, and then start filling in the gaps. And just like what you said, prepare as soon as possible. And I love your note when you said, I did the work when I was in. I got my education. I, started doing a resume when I was a staff sergeant. And that is what we want to stress is when you join basic training, start thinking about how you can make yourself marketable not just in your current career, because that's what the military is, that's a career, but in the future, just in case you get the medical, discharge, just in case you hear some bad news, or just in case there's a whatever, your career job reservation doesn't get renewed, or your commission doesn't go through, whatever it may be. It's like civilians are preparing for the just in case too. So looking at the job postings, do you think that maybe would help people to identify their experience or their transferable skill set?
Yeah, so I did that as well, and I think that's the best advice you could do,
Yeah.
right? So, I think about the time I was maybe a E7 Master Sergeant, I started looking at these jobs like, what do I want to do when I grow up, right? That's what we say all the time. And I learned about USA jobs early. I learned
Yeah.
about going in and looking at jobs, and I was like, wow, I think I could do this. I think I can do that. I wish I knew about the OPM guidance back then, because I might have got an engineering degree. Because if I had that degree, there's
There's a
some
lot, yeah.
perfect jobs for me out there right now. If I only had the 24 credits of ABET accredited math classes.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably one of the best pieces of advice. If you're in uniform and you're watching this podcast, definitely start looking at both USA Jobs, OPM guidance, and LinkedIn, and all the jobs that are advertised there, Glassdoor, and those things, and look at the requirements. And I'll tell you kind of a funny story about, think about context though also. So in my world, project management, program management, project management is facility focused, renovations, new construction.
Yeah.
And something hard to communicate is, while the commander is the base civil engineer, as a master sergeant and a senior master sergeant in a couple of roles that I specifically had in operations, I was the one orchestrating, right? There's other various leaders, right? And it's a team effort. But like the things on my resume, I'm trying to explain. Imagine a whole city. Misawa, Japan's a big base. Okinawa, Japan, and those things. And how do you articulate that? It's like, we're maintaining a whole base, and this job is for a small community college or whatever the thing is, right? So by perspective, it's small. But here's the funny part of the story. So, well, let me go on. So program management for me is emergency management program, or safety program, or service contracts, program, where I have multiple people on, I don't like to say under me, teammates that are within our organization that
and those programs had multiple projects that filled that program.
Exactly. And so for me, program is multiple projects, like a portfolio, right? And
exactly what it is. Portfolio, program, project. Yep.
But in the IT world, it's different. Program management is literally computer programs. And I didn't know that. IT is not instructional technology, it's informational technology.
Yeah.
And so here's the funny story. So I got out,
But to me and you, IT is instructional technology, because that's what they called it in the Air Force, and that's what our CCAF is in.
Well, I have 9 years in ATC. Yeah. I mean, you know what I mean? And so here's the example. So we have an LLC here in the community. The guy, it's a husband-wife duo that own the company. He retired from the Community College of the Air Force up in Maxwell. I didn't know all that, of course, when I saw the job ad. But I saw the job ad, and everything read like building curriculum. And so my mindset was like, oh man, this is me. This is perfect. It's a hybrid job. I have an office here at the house, so I can do some work here. I can drive 20 minutes to the other office, work with them. And then at the end of the interview, and I'm like, wow, this is going great. In my head, I even dressed up. The interview is at his house. I'm all dressed up, and he's like, oh, you didn't, I had a tie, everything. I'm thinking this is $120,000 a year job. So I dressed for what I think I should for that level job. And at the end, he's like, so how much do you know about, I think he said computer programming. Because I was a computer admin as an NCO, as a side job, an extra duty. And so I'm pretty, I understand computers fairly well. And for the CE community, probably better than most. But the way he asked it, I quickly realized he's talking about networks and programs and interfaces and the background stuff that I don't have a lot of experience in. Like I built a web page once. So I think that's the other thing. It's just for two parts. If you're out there in the HR community and you're writing these, make sure you give
Yeah.
enough context so us applicants out there that we kind of know what the job is. Because there's so many jobs that I applied for that the context wasn't quite there. And you show up and it's like a project management job I applied for with the shipbuilders down here in the Gulf Coast. It was a marketing job.
Hmm.
And it's like I can do marketing. I think I could do. Maybe I'm not the best. I have some gaps that I need to learn, but I think I have a skill set that fits in that world.
Oh
But
yeah,
that's
because
not what I
marketing
think.
is so diverse. So
Yeah. But I
yeah.
came to the interview ready for project management, and I did my homework on earned value management because that's more critical in a for-profit organization. So I think while you're looking at those early, and you prepare for that, just make sure that you understand some of the context and how that could read and kind of
Yeah.
categorize those things so that you're preparing yourself for the ones that are in the correct category that works for your skill set.
Yeah, and identifying your transferable skill sets, this is something that civilians have to do as well. So this is not unique to the military. This is unique to the teacher that wants to be the project manager. This is unique to the nurse that wants to, whatever it may be. I mean, civilians are out there trying to identify their transferable skill set too. So the first thing that you can do, and we always stress, is look at those job postings, highlight those things that you've done before, and then start looking at the basic requirements and the preferred requirements and start filling in the gaps when it comes to those skill sets. So once you identify your transferable skill sets, now we need to validate those skill sets. And so you say education, that's on one side of the triangle, and then your credentials, right? And so again, go back to that job posting and look, what are those basic requirements? What are those preferred requirements? And if you're doing this early on in your military career, then you can start utilizing all the programs out there for your certifications, for Air Force School, Army School for school. And I
Yes.
know that there's a lot of changes that are taking place. And so some changes include that you have to earn a degree in your career field or whatever it may be. But the one thing I always tell, people that are still serving now, the civilian sector, they're paying for their own degrees. The civilian
Yeah.
sector, they're paying for their own certifications. And
Yeah.
so get the degree, use the money that you can, get the degree as close to, what it is that you want to learn. But then also don't be shy that, if I think about all the money that I wasted on food or going out or whatever, like I could probably have a couple different degrees underneath my belt. So, start validating that experience that you have with that civilian credential, just like what you said, like an HR credential. That's important for me and you, right? Because HR in the military is not HR in the civilian sector.
Yeah.
So we have to learn a new language and we have to be able to translate what we do. Same thing with project management. Most people that are walking out of the military have some sort of experience in project management. But I love what you said. We also have to remember, context, but there's also levels, right? There's levels of project managers. It's a project admin, it's a project coordinator, it's an assistant project manager, or a senior project manager, whatever it is. And so, we've identified our skill sets, we've validated them with a credential. And now we need, just like what you said, we need to show and tell via the resume and the interview. So let's look at that verbal translation and stuff. So how do we share our stories? What are some tips, knowing what you know now and kind of being in the thick of it? How do we share that transferable skill set?
I want to hit on one thing and I'll go try and answer that. There's another dynamic with all of that we were just talking about, and it really screws up our thought process. And that dynamic is sometimes a peer or somebody that is almost a peer, like maybe you have more education than them or more experience, or maybe that's not the case. Sometimes I'll get that dream job, and
Yeah.
that changes your expectations. And so I think there's a trap there. So another piece, a nugget I would like to pass on is don't fall into that trap because somebody got that dream job. That those jobs are far and few between, and timing is everything. And luckily they were ready. And so you can be that person if that next opportunity comes, but don't measure yourself on based on that. I
Yeah, I
think that's
love that.
kind of
And
important.
just to touch on that again, every job can have aspects of a dream job.
Yes.
And I guarantee you that the peer that gets the dream job, it's not his dream job. It's just there's more dream job aspects than there's not, you know. And we also, that's why I tell veterans, like, take it 1 year at a time. You know,
Yeah.
I love what you said. You know, there are jobs where you learn and there's jobs where you earn. And ideally, you would like to do both, right? Learn and earn. But
Yeah.
as you're transitioning, you're not starting from, you know, the very beginning, but you may need to put some reps in, you know, in account, I mean, in effect, in order to achieve that dream job, whatever it may be.
Well, and as long as you're always growing. So I feel like, and I made this comment that I feel like I'm 4 or 5 steps back from where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
But I'm still polishing my skills. I'm
Mhm.
doing a lot more uphill development. So my supervisor's only been doing it for 3 years. But luckily, we have a good rapport where she really takes my advice. And I'm trying to coach her and help her as she's briefing an O6. And she knows my background of briefing, 1, 2, and 3-star generals. So she takes that in, luckily, because she's fantastic. Um, and so there's a piece of me that's growing in the aspect of being an advisor to some uphill
Yeah.
advisor, right? So I'm growing. And sometimes one last piece on this,
Yeah.
and I told this to my friend because there's some jobs, there's some people out there, and this okay. It's everybody's different. There's that job that is kind of, I don't want to call it cruise control, but it's a job where you go, you do your 8 to 10 hours, or whatever that looks like, and you go home and you're making your money, and it's a good thing, and every life is great. But there are those skills, and so I have to take my own advice again. My advice to him was, because he took a great job as the senior training manager for the training group. And my advice to him was like, listen, Greg, oh, I'm not supposed to say names, but
You're
no, it's
okay.
okay. It's a positive thing. So I
Yes.
said, hey, sometimes it's not about you.
Yeah.
Sometimes growth is about how you can affect other people. And you have a skill set. He's very personable, very good with people, way better than I am. Um, and you're going to help that organization grow because of your personality and your knowledge. You're smart. He does his homework, so he knows stuff as well. And the other day, he's like, Dave, you're right. Dave, you're right. I was like, oh, about it's not about you this time. And so the other day, I had to tell myself the same thing. It's like, this opportunity isn't about me and my career growth. It's an opportunity for me to pause a little bit, regroup, take care of my wife who's going through a few things right now. Um, but also, I'm helping the small section of my organization grow. I'm helping them understand what an O6 level brief looks like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that kind of
it's
thing.
I'm
So,
so glad that you said that because when I was at Continental for 4 years, you know, I had a lot of military peers, a few chiefs, and you know, people that were like, Missy, you're selling yourself short. You know, you can do so much more. You have the skill set you can do. And I'm like, you have no idea what I get to do every single day. I get to come to work every day, coach up, coach down. These people are sponges. They want this information. I have HR generalists that want to know how to mediate a conversation. We know that. Me and you, we get trained on that, right?
yeah.
Every day that I walked into Continental Tire, it was a day where I was able to take everything that I've learned from Airman Leadership School, NCO Academy, Senior NCO Academy, all my degrees and everything, and actually use it. And people wanted it. People wanted that information. So was I in a title that maybe wasn't conducive to my rank in the military? Sure, whatever. But so much that I was earning had nothing to do with my paycheck.
Yeah, and that's it too. And I've applied for jobs that were lower pay because it looked like a very satisfying job too. And I'm not above doing anything, but I want that balance of pay.
Yeah.
I didn't go to, and I'm going to start to try to segue back into what your
No, you're
question
good.
is. And I think your question is, how do we articulate
Yeah, how do
what
we
our military?
show our transferable skill set, our
Yeah.
education and everything in the resume, in the interview, you know, those conversations that we're having?
Well, and I think you kind of said some of it too. Why did I go to? It ties to this, right? And this is kind of the
Yeah.
segue into it. I was working long hours. When I was a master trying to make senior, I was working 70 to 80 hours, which is not a good idea, right? I drove
No.
myself to the ground. But then I was doing 40 hours a night studying for my master's degree because I knew I needed it to get the job I wanted later.
Yeah.
Luckily, I had a good wife and kids that supported me, and they knew about why I was doing it. But also, I'm studying for senior and then studying for chief, right? Trying to make rank.
Yeah.
So I was beating myself to the ground. But what I would, but that ties into how do we communicate to industry? Some of the things that you talked about, and a couple of things I mentioned earlier as well. Um, when I say I did this, and I've articulated this in a couple of interviews later after a lot of failed interviews. I'm getting better at it, right? It takes practice, I guess.
It does.
Um, is that while you see all these things that are on this paper about those targeted things on my resume, right? Because I'm only capturing 10 years on 2 pages or more if it's a CV or something. What I need you to understand is while I was doing this, I was raising a family. All
Yeah.
right. I was a provider. I was the only bread maker. I was going to working on my education, my credentialing. I was studying for promotion. I was what you don't see, and I'm not going to put it in my resume. Let's say one of my jobs, I was at Fort Leonard Wood. I was the senior enlisted leader uh, for that organization. We had, I don't know, 130 uh, enlisted folks. Well, those folks are working hard and they deserve to get awards,
Yeah.
promotions, and all of these accolades that they work hard, their actions have earned. But they need me during the day. My commander needs me. I have to be in meetings all day long.
Yeah.
So the reason I was working so many hours because if I failed them, I failed their family too.
Mm.
And they did their job. And so as in those positions, I'm writing line by line, word by word, every single thing I can to communicate to the promotion board that what these individuals do. What's the action, what's the result, and why does it matter, right? What was their part? What did they do? Um, so that if they deserve it through their actions, the right people get promoted.
Yeah.
And how do you articulate that? And that's more of a question to you because I can tell you I don't know that I get it right every time, but I've been working on that skill set of saying, hey, by the way, when you're looking at this part of my resume, I was also doing these other things. That's what military life is about. That's why we're adaptable. And some of the skills like that you mentioned with Senior NCO Academy. Well, let's talk about Airman Leadership School, NCO Academy, Senior NCO Academy, Chief Leadership School, whatever those
Yeah.
things are. We're also doing that. So the skills that I have, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that I bring to the table are things that either they're far and few between for natural people with the natural ability, and they take years to develop through mistakes, failures, and successes. So that's the part you hiring authority. You don't have to train me. You just have to fill in the gaps on some of the skill set, which are things that can be learned. Most of
Absolutely.
the things you need to train me are things that can be learned.
Absolutely. And I do believe that, in as an industry for human resources, hiring and stuff like that, we are identifying those, different populations such as, females, veterans, whatever it is. And we're trying to understand, that especially veterans, there's a lot like SHRM has a special training out there for employers, Vex PM, we put together a veteran hiring toolkit. It's like 35 pages of here's how to read a resume of a veteran, and here's what to consider or what questions to ask, whatever it may be. And so I always say it's a two-way conversation in interviews, but again, it comes down to what can you control? You can control
Yeah.
the stories. And so the stories that you come up with, whether you use the STAR method, situation, task, action, result, prepare, 10 stories for 10 common questions that can be utilized for different questions. And then just do your best to articulate the complexity of being a military member, because you're absolutely right. I often say that there are so many parallels between the military and the civilian sector, and I do think that is true. But being in the civilian sector now and coming from the military, you're absolutely right. While we're doing XYZ, we're also doing, ABC. I mean, I remember going to school, right? Especially every time October through December comes up. I don't know if you go through this either, but I start getting like a little stressed because it's like end of year, evals and packages and awards and, us
Quarterly
seniors.
and annual at the same time.
Yes. And us senior NCOs, we never go on holiday leave because we're back writing, writing the packages. So yeah, I love that you brought that up, is that's what we need to start articulating. But just like what you said, it comes with practice, right? And so this is what I tell veterans all the time. Take it 1 year at a time. And for my project managers out there, and for anyone really, keep a notebook or keep a lessons learned log or a hot wash or an after action, whatever you call it, and make sure you keep track of who you're applying to, because you want to make sure that you're not just, pressing enter, 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 and you have no idea what applications are out there. Keep track of who you're applying to, and then every interview you have, write down questions that they asked you. Do you remember coming out of the PDG test and us going to our cars and highlighting?
Yes.
Yeah, do the same thing for those interviews. It's like record questions that they asked, things that caught you off guard, things that you did well at, things that maybe you need a little bit more practice at. And then, just like what we stress all the time, it's all about continuous improvement. Every single day, we're getting 1% better. And if you think you're going to master your transition, I encourage you to change your mindset. As a military member, we think that we should be the best of the best. Contrary to popular belief, I don't know if you believe this, Dave, but we're not supposed to PR every day. We're not supposed to set a personal record every day. This transition can't be another task. It has to be a process. It has to be something where you are all in mentally, but you also recognize, just like, something that you said that kind of hit me, because I've also dealt with it. It's like, now, we retire, but our kids are older, and the amount of time that you put into your kid when they're younger sometimes will equal the amount of time that they put into you when they're older. And so, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes I look back and I'm like, man, I would take a couple of those promotions and those awards back if I could have a little bit more, time with my son, or a closer relationship with my son. And so we have to keep that in perspective, is when we retire, we get to do now what we always said we were going to do. So as we wrap up, Dave, what are some things that you would like to leave, our listeners with, as far as, preparation or lessons learned, or anything that you want to, teach us?
So, kind of to your point about the kids, right? My regret, my older son, I'm lucky that I had some opportunity to fix our relationship. And now, luckily, he moved here. So, now we can go have beverages. We're doing a little whiskey thing. And so that's great. And it's the healthiest, most amazing relationship. But I think with my younger son, when he said, "Hey, can we go practice soccer?" I said no too many times. And so I'm real nervous about that relationship, and I might have broke it. So I think one piece of advice is, like I said, I don't know the right term. I don't like balance. Harmony is not bad. Ratio is what I use until I find a better word. What's that work-life family ratio look like? Because so you don't have regret later on. And what's that balance of ambition? So that's one piece. The other one is, and some of this is timing. It took me a year and a half maybe to get my resume to not be military resume and more better, translate better to the industry. And it was with a lot of help. That's the PM was help. There's some other resume writers out there. And I have one of the resumes I wrote that was also very successful, but it took a while. It took a lot of iterations to get that done. So writing that today, like, I don't care where you're at in your career. If you don't have a solid resume that translates, start today, get some help. There's some free resources. There's some other resources you pay for, depending on where you're at financially. Do what you want, or what you can handle. But at least start with the free resources. And you might not agree with everything. The Vets to PM stuff I got back, I took 80 to 90%, but it's way better. You don't have to
Yeah.
agree with everything. It's different nuggets and perspectives. So I would say do it today, period. Dot. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't say, hey, I'm going to work on this a year from retirement. Do it today so you can start getting that help. The other thing is the transition assistance programs for the various organizations out there. Now, I was caught in a bad timing. I did
Yeah. COVID.
COVID. I was in the middle of
Yeah.
COVID,
Same
and
here.
I thought, oh, I'm going to executive tab, so I'm going to get a whole different thing. I didn't. I got the same thing, and I didn't get the interview practice. And so, if I could drive one big thing, two big things, okay, the three translations, right?
Yeah.
First, I'm going to scroll up here. The verbal part, interviews.
Yeah.
Find a way to yes, whether it's taps, which might be too late. Start practicing the interviews. That's to PM, I think, might have some help with that.
Yep.
Um, Vet Jobs, I think, have some resources. The resources are out there, free and paid resources.
Oh yeah.
Find it and start it now, period. Don't be like me and be arrogant enough to think that you're good enough to get through those unless you've been doing them for a while. So get that so you can verbally translate your skills and abilities, knowledge, skills, and
Yeah.
abilities to the hiring authority. Um, get that resume written as early as possible so you can drive home what those look like in the civilian sector. And then your mental uh, status or expectation management. Identify what your goals are. They have to be written or just a dream, right? There's
Yep.
variations of that comment, but write them down and what the obstacles and the steps to get to those goals are, whether it's education, experience, or credentialing. Start working towards those and get that mental mindset of they don't know you until you sell them your narrative. What's your
Yeah.
elevator speech, your pocket speech? Know what your narratives look like and how to tell that story. And I think you said something great that I'm going to add to my repertoire is that narrative looks different based on the job that you're applying for. And you said, have a few different versions of that story. So
Yeah.
I completely agree with that comment. And I think I'll finish with my last statement. And all that ties in together once again to that humble approach, confident execution.
Yeah. Yeah, I love
Stay
it.
humble.
And Dave, like the whole time that we're talking, I can so relate to everything that you're feeling right now, that you're enduring. And the biggest thing that I just try to tell anyone who's currently serving, whether you've been in for 1 year or 30 years, you
Yeah.
know, it's really all about what you can do today to prepare for tomorrow. And the biggest thing that my husband and I always said was, we know that the first 2 to 4 years outside of the military are going to be a learning experience for us, and we're going to take notes. And one thing that we did as a family is that we truly lived 1 year at a time. And at the end of every year, we just evaluated, what does success look and feel like to us? How is our work-life balance? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Because we always have these big dreams. When I separate, when I retire, I want to do this, I want to do that, and then is our son adjusting as well? Because that's the biggest thing too, is especially when you're like, for us, like our families are military families. And so
Yeah.
our transition, we have to take into account, it's also their transition as well. And so we're 4 years out. We think we think we're okay. Like it's like, all right, like this is finally the first year where we kind of figured out the whole taxes thing. Like, good Lord,
Mm,
there's just so many
yeah.
things that you have to think about. 20 years together in the military, we've never owed taxes. We've always got money back. And then the first year out, we were like, what? What do we owe? And those are just things that if you prepare today, when those unexpected things come up, tomorrow is not so jarring. You're not going to be sort of pushed off the ledge, but it really starts with what can you do today in order to prepare for tomorrow. And Dave, thank you so much for this conversation. Thanks for helping us. And I love the humble approach and confident execution. And that's going to help a lot of our veterans today. And I know that, you're still in this this transition. So if there's anything that we can do to help you, please let us know. But you're helping the community, and just like any chief would, you're going to, coach up and coach down the chain to make sure that, everyone else, after you is going to have a smooth and successful transition, whatever that definition is to them. Any last words?
Yeah, I think the last word is about feedback. For us in the military, we learn about giving feedback, but we don't learn about receiving feedback from uphill or below. And I think kind of goes to that humble approach, right? There's a time where I was being a little too assertive in a meeting, and I had a good master sergeant come talk to me. He's like, Chief, you think you always need to know the answer? And I was like, well, I act like that, but that's not the way I think I am. And so being able to turn off your defense mechanism to receive the feedback, and it's critical in this too.
Oh, yeah.
Because if after 4 years, I am extremely fatigued. I have application fatigue, right? I am worn out. And so I think my last two comments are just be resilient.
Yeah.
Be mindful. If you can name it, you can tame it. A good friend of mine, John Bentley, said that. If you can name the issue, then you can tame it.
Yeah.
And think about taking feedback. And that feedback comes from anybody at any level, any background. Somebody might have pulled themselves out of the mud a lot more times than you. And you just got to be willing to accept that and turn off your defense mechanism so you can be in receive mode. And
Absolutely.
I think that's about the last thing I have to say.
Yeah, I had a great chief once that told me, as he said, as easy as it is for you to assume the worst, it should be that easy to assume the best. And so when it comes to your military transition with your tips and tools, dear veterans, people that are about to retire or separate now, what you do today will help you help prepare you for tomorrow. Humble approach, confident execution.
Awesome.
Be resilient and take some feedback. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Military Transition Academy podcast. If you found value in today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share with others who might benefit from these stories and lessons. Until next time, keep pushing forward in your own transition journey. And remember, you're not alone. We're here every step of the way. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.